Greetings from Castle Goring, from Mickey and from me. Well, today is a momentous day. Prince Philip is being buried at Windsor Castle and in St. George's Chapel in a service that he plotted himself, and he never wanted a fuss, and he's getting as little a fuss as it's possible for somebody of his stature to get, while acknowledging the tremendous good that he did throughout his life. He certainly did as much good as it was possible for any consort to do. He was progressive, he was a forward thinker, he was a humanitarian in the true sense of the word, not in the sense of using humanitarianism as a tax dodge or as a way of boosting your profile or as a way of making yourself popular. He didn't care about popularity, as everybody knows, and he simply did what he thought was good and right for people so that he would end up making a difference. And he did make a difference. He visited, I think 50 Commonwealth countries alone. He undertook tens of thousands of royal engagements. He traveled to practically every country that it is possible to think of, with a few exceptions. He created, but before I go into his accomplishments, I would like to make the point that this is basically not going to be about his accomplishments. It's going to be about his close personal relationships. Because Prince Philip was very, very family orientated and very much, believe it or not, a people person, but a people person with heart and soul, but not a great deal of overt warmth. Yet, if you were in difficulties, he was the perfect person to go to. But he wasn't namby-pamby. He wasn't wearing his heart on his sleeve. He was not overtly affectionate. But if you were in a jam, he was the person to go to. And he tried to improve the lot of people in this world and of animals in this world. And to a large extent, he succeeded. But the main thing that mattered to him, aside from doing good for humanity and making a difference, and he used to say, I'm not interested in all of the kerfuffle and, let's just get on with it and we don't want any fuss. And if there was a meeting and people were waffling on, he said, come on, let's get to the point. He wanted results, and he understood that in life, people who he had to have helping him would divide up into two camps. Those who wanted to achieve results and do the work, and those who wanted to bask in the rewards. He had very little time for the second lot and all the time in the world for the first lot. On his public engagements, he was always most charming and most down to earth with the ordinary people. He didn't like kerfuffle and pretense, and he didn't care that people were grand. He cared that people were people, and as far as he was concerned, rank, style, and position were simply things to use in life to make your life and everybody else's life better. He was not about marching, he was not about exploiting, he was about giving. The most important thing to him, aside from his work, was his family and his loved ones. I will briefly touch upon two aspects of his work, or maybe three. The very first thing that he undertook was the National Playing Fields Association, which he inherited from his father-in-law. King George VI, when he was the Duke of York, after the First World War, started this association with his father's blessings to try to save parks and green spaces within towns, within cities, near to towns, near to cities, so that they would not be gobbled up by developers, and so that the people would have access to playing fields, which is what parks and sports grounds and open spaces were all about, and still are. He turned it over relatively recently, and I think it's called something else now. I can't remember what it's called. Fields in Trust, I think it's called. He turned over to Prince William, who has taken it over. And it's a very important thing, because one of the beauties of English, Scottish, Welsh, and Northern Irish, and indeed Southern Irish life, is the green spaces in developed areas. And that is something that Prince Philip, and before him King George VI, when he was the Duke of York, set out to achieve. And they have been to a large extent successful. And it makes a big difference to people's lives if you have a park to go to. Because I remember walking up 3rd Avenue in New York when I was 25, thinking, oh gosh, my life for a tree. You just were so hungry for green spaces in New York, as indeed you are in Paris as well. You know, many cities don't have sufficient greenery, but we in London and in many of our cities in Britain do. His other great accomplishment, aside from the World Wildlife Fund for Nature, which made him one of the fathers of the ecological movement, was the Duke of Edinburgh's awards scheme, which he started in consultation with Kurt Hahn. I would refer you either to my book, if you want to read my book on the Queen's marriage, where I go into the thinking behind the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme, or just Google it. It's a really interesting organization, and it was calculated to give ordinary boys, and then boys and girls. It started out as a purely male thing, I think, for teenagers up to about 24, and then they quickly expanded it for girls, and millions of people have taken part in the scheme over the decades. And they will tell you, if you speak to them, that it made a huge difference to their lives, because it gave them a focal point, and it opened their eyes and gave them a sense of direction, and they developed thought processes and put them in touch with strengths that it would never have occurred to them that they had. Despite being somewhat aloof in manner, Prince Philip was very warm-hearted, but he was warm-hearted in an apparently emotionless way, but in a very spiritual way. This was really largely because he was, as a little boy, he was the adored only son with 4 elder sisters. He was born in 1921. Father was Prince Andrew of Greece, who was one of the younger sons of King George I of the Hellenes. His mother was Princess Alice of Battenberg, whose mother was a granddaughter of Queen Victoria, and whose father was First Sea Lord and one of the most eminent naval figures of his age. There were 4 girls born before Prince Philip. The first was Princess Margaret, born in 1905. She married Prince Gottfried of Hohenlohe-Langenburg, who was her cousin. His grandmother, if I recall correctly, was a daughter of Prince Alfred, Duke of Edinburgh, who was Queen Victoria's second son, and his mother was the Grand Duchess Maria Alexandrovna of Russia. So they were cousins. The next daughter to be born was in 1906, who was Theodora, and she married Berthold Margrave of Baden, who was the only son of Prince Max of Baden, who was also the Margrave of Baden, who is the man who effectively caused the abolition of the Hohenzollern dynasty, because he was the Chancellor of Germany at the end of the First World War. And when Kaiser Wilhelm was hesitating about abdicating and was considering remaining King of Prussia, but abdicating as German Emperor, he announced his abdication despite the fact that Wilhelm had not abdicated. He was also related to the family. Then the third sister was Princess Cecile, who was born in 1911. And she, for many years, was the closest sister to Prince Philip. She married the hereditary Grand Duke of Hesse. And she is the one who, with her husband and with their 2 sons and her mother-in-law and various other members of their suite, were killed in that plane crash at Ostend, coming in 1937 to his brother Prince Ludwig of Hesse's wedding to Margaret Geddes. That was sister number 3. And Cecile was his favorite sister. And he used to spend an awful lot of time with the family in Darmstadt and at Wolfgarten. And because by then his family had fractured. So this was a huge loss to him. And he never got over it. He used to say that it was one of the great sadnesses of his life. And the last sister, Sophie, who was born in 1914, if I remember correctly, she married twice. Her first husband was Prince Christopher of Hesse. There were two branches of the Hesse family, by the way. The Darmstadt Hesses, and who were Grand Dukes of Hesse. And then there were the other branch of the Hesse family, who were the Landgrafs of Hesse. And Prince Christopher of Hesse's mother was Princess Margaret of Prussia, who was Kaiser Wilhelm's daughter. And his brother was married to Princess Mafalda of Italy, whose father was the King of Italy. And all of this is important because during the Second World War, the German royals were all obliged to serve in their army. They had no choice in the matter. And those who had a choice in the early days of the Nazi regime thought they could control Hitler, and discovered to their cost that they couldn't. And Prince Philip's family themselves suffered as a result of the choices that they made, because when Italy left the war on the side of the Axis powers in 1943, the King of Italy simply dismissed Mussolini and appointed General Badoglio. Well, Hitler then invaded Italy, seized the north of Italy, executed Mussolini's son-in-law, who had taken part in the coup, Count Ciano, arrested Princess Philip of Hesse, whose father, the King of Italy, had fled into Allied territory, and she died in Buchenwald concentration camp. Her husband, Prince Philip of Hesse, after whom Prince Philip was named, he ended up in a concentration camp as well. And he recounts how surprised he was to discover how the Nazis, which he had actually thought incredibly, we may think, but a lot of Germans did think that they followed due law and procedure, and he discovered they didn't. Well, he survived by the skin of his teeth, but his brother, Prince Christopher, who was married to Philip's sister Sophie, he was, according to Lord Mountbatten, assassinated by Hitler because Hitler managed to doctor the plane that he and the pilot, under Hitler's orders, were taking to fly back from Italy to Germany, and it crashed. So he was exterminated. It is important to understand how nuanced history can be, because, of course, Prince Philip was a rabid anti-Nazi, and he was fighting on the side of the Allies at the very moment that his brothers-in-law, whom he loved, were fighting on the side of the Nazis. How Philip's four sisters came to get married is really rather interesting, because they were married off very quickly and very young. Towards the end of the 1920s, Philip's mother Alice began to display signs of what I suppose psychiatrists would have called mental disturbance. This affected her marriage, obviously. Some people will say that her mental illness was brought on by the philandering of her husband. Who knows? The fact of the matter is that she ended up having a serious nervous breakdown and she was committed, by which time Philip was sent from France, where he was living, to go to Cheam School, preparatory school, in the south of England, to join his first cousin, David Milford Haven, who was a student there. David was 2 years older than Philip. And this started off what became a lifelong friendship, where they were like brothers. However, the family decided to send Philip to Salem, where his brother-in-law, Berthold, had a school, the brother school, I suppose you could call it, of Gordonstoun. Well, Prince Philip was an absolute disaster because he was very anti-Nazi. He thought the Nazis were ridiculous, used to mock them relentlessly, walking through the town, goose-stepping and giving the Nazi salute and, making it obvious that he thought they were ridiculous, which was not the thing to do in a dictatorship. So he was duly packed off to Gordonstoun. To put things in a slightly more chronological way, in 1930, the children's mother was committed to a mental institution where she remained for over 2 years. Philip, who had already been dispatched to boarding school, continued what would become a round of visits because the core of his family now split asunder and actually disappeared. Father decamped to the south of France, where he lived the life of Riley at times, and at other times was in Greece, because at certain periods of Philip's childhood, the Greek monarchy, which had been in exile from 1922, was restored. And when it was restored, Prince Andrew, who had been banished from the kingdom, was allowed back and was an important functionary in his nephew's kingdom. So Prince Andrew, who was playing his part as a member of the royal family, has been somewhat unfairly accused of being nothing but a playboy, and that is not true. He did have responsibilities in Greece that he did live up to when he was allowed to do so. And when he wasn't, he was a sybarite in the south of France. Before he decamped, however, and before the whole family scattered to the four winds, he organized marriages for all of his daughters. The first one, age 16, and they were all married in a matter of months, was Princess Sophie, who was 16 years old at the time, December 1930. She got married to the Kaiser's nephew, Christopher, the one who would be ultimately assassinated by Hitler. After the assassination, she would remarry. She married another cousin, Prince George of Hanover. Of course, as some of you will know, the British royal dynasty was the House of Hanover until Queen Victoria married Prince Albert, at which point it became the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. And following the change of name in 1917, it became the House of Windsor. Some people with some merit, it has to be said, including Lord Mountbatten, thought it should have been the House of Mountbatten because Lilibet had married Philip. Well, Philip didn't actually want it to be the House of Mountbatten. He thought it should be the House of Edinburgh because his rank was Edinburgh. And it's maybe not a well-known fact, but many royals do not have surnames. And certainly Prince Philip was born without a surname. So Mountbatten was an artifice adopted when he became a British citizen in 1947. Philip loved his sisters dearly, and his sisters loved him dearly. After the family split asunder, and he did not thereafter see his mother from 1930 until 1937, when he saw her for at Cecile's funeral, and that caused her to be readmitted into the fold and to readmit her family, because after she was released from the asylum, she refused to have anything to do with her family. I'm sure in part because she was worried that they would try to get her committed again, so she kept well away from them, and she had nothing to do with any of them, including Philip, until Cecile's death. And it was said that Cecile's death shocked her back into sanity. Maybe eccentric sanity, but sanity nevertheless. Well, Philip loved his mother and he loved his father. He never ever had a dry word to say against either parent. His mother was a great eccentric, but during the war, when Philip was allowed to go to Greece, he went. He was a Greek prince. His mother started living in Greece once she returned to the fold of the family. And she was living in Greece during the war. She housed a family of Jews, notwithstanding the fact that she lived practically next door to the Gestapo headquarters. She was an extraordinary woman, deaf, but extraordinary. Philip loved his extended family as well. He spent a lot of time with his Uncle George and Aunt Nada, who were David Milford Haven's parents. He gradually, once Georgie Milford Haven died, became close to his uncle Dickie, who was Lord Louis Mountbatten's side of the family, and became great friends with Dickie and Edwina's two daughters, Patricia and Pamela. And one of his attractions, by his own account, to the Queen was that she was from such a close and loving family. And in his courtship of the Queen, Princess Margaret was practically always present. He didn't mind. And he got along famously with Princess Margaret. He got along famously with King George VI. He got along less famously with Queen Elizabeth because she had not wanted them to get married. And she did everything in her power to dissuade Lilibet from marrying him, to no effect whatsoever. Then he and Lilibet had Charles and Anne. And it's interesting because in my book, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, I show how Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, used to play really rather naughty emotional games. And she undermined the Queen and Prince Philip with the upbringing of Prince Charles and pandered to his extreme sensitivity and encouraged it at a time that Prince Philip and the Queen were hoping to toughen him up. She was intent on mollycoddling him, and this caused huge problems in the family. But the family remained ostensibly united, although there really was a power struggle going on between Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. And the Queen, she revered her mother, she adored her husband, and she didn't take sides, she didn't choose. But she made sure that she had the marriage she wanted with the man she wanted. Because really of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother's interference in Prince Charles's upbringing, and because of her encouragement of aspects of his personality that it would have been better off not encouraging, Prince Charles and his father ended up having a rather more checkered relationship than they would otherwise have had. But he had a wonderfully close relationship with Princess Anne, who really is Prince Philip in skirts, I've got to tell you. Prince Andrew came along in 1960, then Prince Edward in 1964, if I remember correctly. And Prince Andrew was the apple of the Queen's eye. By that time, she and Philip were over the tension that had been introduced into their lives by Sir Winston Churchill, Tommy Lascelles, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, trying to keep control of the Queen and trying to put as much distance between her and Prince Philip as possible so that Prince Philip would have no or little or reduced influence at court. So it's a very interesting way how the Queen and Prince Philip were able to negotiate their way around some really treacherous waters in the early days of her reign. He got along well with Andrew, who is very much a man's man, but also a mummy's boy. He got along with Edward and has always got along with Edward. And in fact, Edward has been working with his father for many years now, doing the Duke of Edinburgh's awards scheme. And ultimately, Prince Edward will become the Duke of Edinburgh. Well, the children got married, and Prince Philip at first was enchanted by Diana, as was everybody in the royal family. Diana set out, Mickey's snoring, Diana set out to seduce everybody and succeeded brilliantly. However, there was Diana pre-marriage and Diana post-marriage. And it became apparent once Diana and Charles returned from honeymoon that there were serious problems because Diana had changed completely from the sweet, obliging girl that she had been before the marriage into a demanding, a brittle, very disturbing and rather disturbed girl that nobody recognized. It has to be said in fairness to Diana, her personality fractured. Nobody realized until it happened that the pressures of becoming Princess of Wales, of the extraordinary degree of fame, the attention, and developing bulimia to slim down for the wedding would actually trigger basic fractures within her personality, and that these would have the most catastrophic effect upon her well-being, her moods, her ability to function and to cope. She functioned beautifully in public, but she struggled and struggled for many years, and she deserves compassion and sympathy for the fact that she was under a lot of pressure and had a lot of personal problems that nobody had been aware of. And she herself might never have been aware of the problems that underlay her basic personality had she not married Charles. But it wasn't Charles's fault, and it wasn't the royals' fault. And Prince Philip, whose aunt had been one of the most eminent psychoanalysts on earth, and who was therefore brought up in a world of very sophisticated attitudes towards psychology and psychiatry, he and the Queen insisted that she get help, and for the next several years they tried to help Diana, and she didn't want the help at first. And this is all a matter of public record. It's certainly a matter that has been religiously covered by me in my books. They were not the cold, unfeeling people that Peter Morgan and the Crown have portrayed them as being. They were, in fact, the antithesis of that. They were very caring and concerned, but you can't help people who don't want to be helped. And until Diana wanted to be helped, she could not be helped and was not helped. But that didn't stop them trotting psychiatrists and therapists in and out in an attempt to try to get her to get help. Philip was extremely sympathetic towards Diana. He knew what it was to have a troubled mother, and therefore a troubled daughter-in-law was not exactly alien territory for him. By Diana's own account, he was wonderful to her. He used to write her letters when the marriage fractured, and he and the Queen tried to get them to stay together, if only ostensibly, which they did for, certainly from 1987, when Diana made her first move to leave, until 1992, when she did leave. There were many attempts made with Prince Philip's active encouragement to keep Diana in the royal fold. He used to write her letters, which are no secret, and he tried to be as non-judgmental and understanding as possible. Sarah he had liked from the word go. He had known Sarah all her life, virtually. Her father was Prince Charles's polo manager. Prince Philip used to play polo. He's the one who started this whole kick with polo with Charles and Harry and William, etc. He liked Sarah at first, but when Sarah's marriage collapsed and she was photographed in a compromising position, he felt this was beyond the pale and refused to have anything more to do with her, which was extremely upsetting for her. And I think in my book, The Royal Marriages, I cover it because I was privy to some really very interesting information, which was that the courtiers, not the royal family, the courtiers had stood down her protection. So she and the children were in the south of France, and the protocol would have been for the British to get the French to cover her protection, and they didn't. And this was done as a warning to Diana of what would happen if she left the family. Well, it didn't stop Diana from leaving, but it destroyed Sarah's reputation. The Duke of Edinburgh, who did not understand that Sarah was as much a victim as a perpetrator, yes, she was having an affair, but she was separated. And so if she wanted to have an affair, why not? It could be a very sympathetic view to take, but he didn't want to know. And thereafter, he really didn't want to know. Edward's wife, he liked Sophie. He thought she was a solid girl, and he loved the fact that Sophie and the Queen had the wonderful relationship that they do have. He and the Queen liked Mark Phillips, and they liked her present husband, Timothy Lawrence. But were they crazy about either one? Well, but you know, the sons-in-law were just the sons-in-law. Sons-in-law are not quite as important in certain families as daughters-in-law. And that's just the way it is in many families. Then the children grew up and got married. Well, first of all, let's stick to the children when they were children. They had 8 grandchildren. They had William and Harry, who they were very fond of and very close to, and Philip was certainly very close to both William and Harry. And may I say at this point that Prince Philip did not drink a lot. In his tribute to his grandfather, Harry has painted the picture of a bear-swilling sort of cheeky chappy. Well, Prince Philip did drink beer. It's well known that he drank beer, but it's also well known that he drank very little. So the image of him always having a beer in his hand, I am afraid, is Harry giving himself the green light so that if he's photographed with anything fashionable in his hand, or it gets out that he likes fashionable things, that there's a precedent for it and it's okay. Well, let's not stretch a point too far, dear Harry. So anyway, he got along very well with both those. He was very fond of Zara and Peter, Princess Anne's children. He was very fond of Beatrice and Eugenie, Prince Andrew's children. And he was also fond of Edward's children, James and Louise. He was a very involved grandfather and a very involved great-grandfather, as the photograph that William published of him taking George for a carriage drive shows. Now, in fact, several of the people I know used to do carriage driving with Prince Philip. And I mean, he was a hardy chap, I've got to tell you, and he loved carriage driving, but it's an acquired skill, I have to tell you. It's not something I'd want to do, but then again, I'm namby-pamby, you know, but he was very robust and hardy. So now we get to the grandchildren's spouses. Philip thought that Catherine according to all reports that I have heard from people who know them very well, thought that Catherine was absolutely wonderful. As far as he was concerned, she was a dream come true. She was everything that matters for royalty. She was attractive, she was personable, she was well presented, she was measured, she was intelligent, she was committed, and she was involved in, and she was interested in a life of service, not to boost herself forward, but taking a leaf out of his book and the Queen's book, to serve and not to be caught up in the ego of the whole thing. Philip used to say, you know, they love the role, they don't love the person. He used to say, and you need to understand that there is a distinction between the two. And he made it his life's work to ensure that neither his head nor the Queen's would ever get swollen. And they were subjected to adulation, the like of which none of us will have seen in our lifetimes, because not even Diana was subjected to adulation that the Queen and Prince Philip were subjected to in their 20s and early 30s, when she first acceded to the throne and before she acceded to the throne. He liked Mike Tyndall. He liked Autumn Phillips, who by all accounts is a really great girl. And of course, Mike Tyndall is a former rugby player. He's a guy, you know, and Prince Philip was a guy. And he loved his grandchildren, and he loved the fact that they had chosen spouses that he liked and approved of. So now we come to Meghan. When Meghan stated that there was a special relationship between herself and Prince Philip, if she wanted you to believe that it was special because he thought she was wonderful, no. I mean, special is a word that people with narcissistic tendencies love to use, and they love to portray themselves as being special. And it's interesting that she is reported to have chosen this word to describe her relationship with Prince Philip, because it was special, but it wasn't special in the sense that she would like you to believe it was special. He saw her coming a mile off, just as his daughter, Princess Anne, who was, as I've said before, Prince Philip in skirts, she saw Meghan coming a mile off as well. It has to be said, Meghan's initial charm worked with the Queen and worked with Prince Charles, both of whom are less hard-headed emotionally than Princess Anne and Prince Philip, who are very loyal and very devoted, but they can smell fish a mile off. And Prince Philip was dead against the marriage, according to the information I have got. And I'm now speaking about information I got 2 years ago, and which I put into my book, Meghan and Harry, The Real Story. Prince Philip was not in favor of the marriage. He told Harry that we step out with actresses. We don't marry them. And Harry balked when his grandfather tried to dissuade him from the marriage. And it's all there in my book. He did what Meghan and he have been doing since and were doing from before. Played the race card. Well, the Queen and Prince Philip felt they had little choice but to allow Harry the rope with which he could build a swing or do other things with, to put it like that. Of course, Prince Philip was nice to Meghan, and he's very charming, and he likes pretty girls, and Meghan is, whatever you may think of her, she is an attractive woman. But she is abrasive, she is hard, but she is not sentient. She is the antithesis of everything that Prince Philip was and everything that Prince Philip held dear and everything that Prince Philip represented. Where she believes in show, he believed in go. Where she believes that it doesn't really matter what your motives are as long as you're there with the camera, it's clicking away, showing how wonderful you are. He couldn't care less what people thought of him. He just wasn't interested. He wasn't playing to the gallery, and he didn't approve of people who played to the gallery. He also could not comprehend how a grandson of his, brought up to understand the tremendous honor, privilege, and opportunity that a life of service can afford you, not only for yourself, but for others. It enhances you spiritually. It gives your life a purpose that money can't buy. He could not understand how Harry could throw it away to chase after the bright lights of Hollywood with Meghan. He was bitterly disappointed. He was also extremely upset that, having turned over the captaincy general of the Marines to Harry after, I think, 64 years, that Harry just chucked it after 2. I mean, he accepted it all. He expressed the view that there was no point being bitter, but deeply regretful, and deeply perplexed that it could happen and that it should happen. And accepted it. He didn't struggle to accept it. He accepted it. But he didn't like it one bit. And Harry and Meghan would like us to believe that the Queen and Prince Philip have been very supportive of all that they have done, and that they are continuing to be supportive. No, they're not. Sweetie pie, when you are from a religious family, nobody likes the fact that you've taken up prostitution. It's as simple as that. And it doesn't matter that you are not prostituting your body. You are prostituting yourself. Nobody in the royal family likes it. The Queen doesn't like it. Prince Philip didn't like it. Nobody in their right mind could like it. Stop the pretense. Everybody knows that it is rubbish to pretend that Prince Philip or the Queen actually are rooting for them to be successful hawkers of their wares in Hollywood. I mean, it's, the complete detachment from reality is something that really astonishes everybody. It is a great pity that Meghan's orchestrations and Harry's dancing to her tune caused his grandfather's last days to be blighted. But there we go. It did. They were blighted. There's nothing to be done about it. Will it have ruined Prince Philip's life? No. A lifetime of accomplishment. He had a checkered history with his elder son Charles, but for the last 20 years of his life, they became increasingly closer. And by the end of it, I understand they had said everything that needed to be said. So he died basically at peace. He died in the presence of the woman he loved, the woman to whom he dedicated his life, and the woman with whom he shared a higher purpose. The calling of monarchy in its proper sense, service to the nation, service to humanity. He regarded it as his honor to serve humanity, and he did a wonderful job of it. And all I will say is that it has been heartening to see the tremendous appreciation people have displayed for him and his efforts. And I'll tell you better, I think with the passage of time, his reputation will grow and grow and grow. I do not think that Prince Philip's lifetime or death are anything but the beginning of what is going to be a wonderful reputation historically. He was a unique man and a truly extraordinary man who led a truly extraordinary life. And it was all about positivity, life enhancement, and understanding what the meaning of life was and enriching his life and everybody else's. I was very pleased and privileged to have met him on occasion, and I thought he was a great guy, and I know I'm not alone in that. And on that note, I will say thank you very much for listening. I hope this has been of interest to you. If you like, please like, subscribe, share, press the notification bell, and do please feel free to ask any questions you would like in the comment section. Thank you very much.